You are not half the woman your sister is. My mother. Patricia spat across the dinner table, sending a shockwave of silence through the room. I slowly wiped my mouth with a napkin, looked her dead in the eye and said, "Then she can start paying your rent." My father turned pale, dropping his fork onto his plate. "Rent? What rent? I own this house," he stammered. He did not know I had secretly bought his mortgage 8 years ago to save him from foreclosure, and tonight I was about to become his worst nightmare. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. My name is Zoe, and for 30 years I have been the invisible ATM for my family. To them, I am just a struggling data entry clerk, driving a beat-up Honda Civic, wearing clothes from the thrift store. They have no idea that the data I enter is actually closing documents for my commercial real estate empire, or that the beat-up car is just a disguise to keep them from asking for more money. But let us go back to last Sunday, the night everything burned down. We were gathered at my parents' house in Atlanta for the mandatory Sunday dinner. The air conditioning was broken again, and the house was stifling hot, but my mother refused to call a repairman, saying they were saving money. Meanwhile, my younger sister Bianca and her husband Kyle were dominating the conversation as always. Kyle, with his slicked back hair and a watch that cost more than my annual fake salary, was bragging about his new tech startup. "We just closed a seed round," he said, reaching for the last piece of fried chicken without asking anyone else. $10,000 for a weekend getaway to Cabo. "You guys should come, it is going to be epic." My mother. Patricia beamed at him like he was the Messiah. She heaped more potato salad onto his plate, ignoring the fact that my father had barely eaten. "Anything for our successful businessman," she cooed then. She kicked me under the table. "Zoe, get up and refill Kyle's iced tea. Do not be rude." I grit my teeth and stood up, taking Kyle's glass. He did not even look at me or say thank you. He just continued talking about cryptocurrency and how traditional jobs were for losers. I walked into the kitchen, my hands shaking with rage. This house where I grew up was a shrine to Bianca. Her graduation photos, her beauty pageant trophies, and her wedding pictures lined every wall. There was not a single photo of me. I filled the glass with ice, wishing I could pour it over Kyle's head instead. When I returned to the dining room, the mood had shifted from celebration to demand. Bianca was pouting, looking at her phone. "Mom, I really need to decompress before the Cabo trip," she whined, playing with her diamond necklace. "But my credit cards are maxed out until Kyle's investors wire the funds next week. I need a spa day." My mother turned to me immediately, her eyes cold and expectant. "Zoe, give your sister $500. She needs to relax, and you have that savings account you never touch." I froze. I had thousands in the bank, but that was not the point. It was the principle. I sat down and took a deep breath. "No," I said simply. "I have bills to pay." The table went quiet. Kyle let out a short, mocking laugh. "Bills? Come on, Zoe. What bills do you have? You live in that tiny apartment and drive a car that should be in a junkyard. Help your sister out. Don't be stingy." My mother slammed her hand on the table, making the silverware jump. "Do not speak to your brother-in-law like that. He is a CEO. He understands finance. You are just a clerk. You are selfish, Zoe. You have always been jealous of Bianca because she married well and you are still single at 30. "Jealous?" I asked, my voice rising slightly. "Jealous of what?" "Her debt. Her husband who treats this family like his personal audience?" Mom stood up, her face turning red with fury. "How dare you? You are ungrateful. We put a roof over your head for 18 years and this is how you repay us. You are not half the woman your sister is." The words hung in the thick, humid air. I looked at Bianca, who was smirking, expecting me to apologize like I always did. I looked at Kyle, who was shaking his head in mock disappointment. Then I looked at my father, Marcus, who was staring at his plate, trying to disappear. I pushed my chair back. The scraping sound against the hardwood floor was loud and harsh. I stood up to my full height, smoothing down my thrift store dress. If I am not half the woman she is, I said, my voice deadly calm, then she can start paying your rent. My father's head snapped up. His face went from flushed to ghost white. In a second, rent. He whispered the word like it was a foreign language. What are you talking about, Zoe? I paid off this house in '98. I have the deed in the safe upstairs. I picked up my purse and looked at my mother, who had suddenly stopped shouting. Her eyes darted back and forth nervously. I laughed, a cold, dry sound. No, Dad, I said. You foreclosed in 2015. Mom didn't tell you, did she? I bought this house from the bank under an LLC so you wouldn't be homeless. But since I am not half the woman Bianca is, I guess I am not half the landlord either. I walked out the front door, leaving them in a silence so heavy it felt like a funeral. As I started my car, I saw my father standing in the window yelling at my mother, holding his chest. And I knew the war had just begun. The silence that I left behind in that dining room did not last long. As I drove away, my rearview mirror captured the frantic silhouette of my father pacing back and forth in front of the bay window. Inside the house, panic had set in like a sudden fever. My father, Marcus, tore up the stairs to the master bedroom, his heavy footsteps thudding against the floorboards. He went straight to the old oak closet where he kept a rusted metal lockbox. His hands were shaking so badly, he dropped the keys twice before he could finally jam the small silver one into the lock. He dumped the contents onto the bedspread, a chaotic pile of birth certificates, social security cards, and fading receipts. My mother, Patricia, stood in the doorway wringing her hands, her face a mask of terrified confusion. See? He shouted, waving a yellowing document in the air. This is the deed. Look at the date, 1998. My name is right here, Marcus Robinson. I told you that girl was lying. I told you she was just trying to hurt us because she is jealous. He was desperate to believe his own words, pointing a trembling finger at the signature line. But my mother, usually so quick to agree with him, hesitated. She walked over to the bed and started sifting through the other papers. Marcus, she whispered. Where are the papers from 2015? Remember when the bank sent those foreclosure notices? Remember when the sheriff put that sticker on the door? Zoe came over with that stack of documents and said she handled it. Where is the copy of what we signed that day? My father froze. He rummaged through the pile again, tossing aside car insurance policies and old utility bills. There was nothing from 2015. Not a single page. The timeline of his ownership seemed to simply vanish after the financial crash. Downstairs in the living room, Kyle was pouring himself a generous glass of my father's expensive scotch. He swirled the amber liquid, looking utterly unbothered by the family crisis unfolding above him. Bianca was pacing on the rug, frantically scrolling through her phone. What if she kicks us out? She whined, her voice pitching up in panic. Kyle, we cannot afford an apartment right now. My credit cards are frozen and your investors haven't wired the money yet. What are we gonna do? Kyle laughed, a low, condescending sound that grated on the nerves. Babe, relax, he said, taking a slow sip. Do you really think your sister, the data entry clerk who shops at Goodwill, owns a $300,000 property? She is bluffing. It is a classic negotiation tactic from someone who has no leverage. He walked over to the stairs and shouted up to my parents. Mom, Dad, come down here and have a drink. Stop looking for papers that do not matter. My parents descended the stairs slowly, looking like ghosts. Kyle put on his best winning smile, the one he used to charm investors out of their savings. Listen to me, he said, draping an arm around my mother's shoulders. Real estate law is complicated. Even if she paid some bills back then, that does not make her the owner. That is called squatters' rights or something. I know people. I will have the legal team at my company look into this first thing in the morning. We will sue her for harassment and emotional distress. She will be begging for forgiveness by Tuesday. My mother let out a breath she had been holding, leaning into him. Oh, thank God, she said. I knew you would know what to do, Kyle. You are so smart. much smarter than that ungrateful girl. While they were comforting themselves with delusions, I was sitting in my car 3 blocks away, watching my phone light up with the fallout of my mother's manipulation. She had clearly wasted no time in calling the family prayer circle. The notifications came in a relentless stream. Aunt Sarah, who had not called me on my birthday in 10 years, sent a long paragraph. "I cannot believe you would threaten your elderly parents like this, after everything they sacrificed for you. Have you no shame?" My cousin Dante messaged me saying, "You think you are better than us now because you have a little money. Do not forget where you came from." Even the family pastor sent a cryptic text quoting a scripture about honoring thy father and mother. Each message was a small, sharp stone thrown at my character. I wanted to scream. I wanted to reply to every single one of them with screenshots of my bank transfers, with the receipts of the roof repairs I paid for, with the truth about who really owned the roof over their heads. But I did not. I placed my phone face down on the passenger seat and drove to my office. I had to be cold. I had to be precise. If they wanted to play the victim, I would give them a villain worthy of their story. I logged into my property management software. I pulled up the file for 124 Maple Street. The lease agreement, which my parents had unknowingly signed as part of the refinancing package years ago, was month to month. It had a clause for market value adjustments. I typed in the new numbers. I printed the document on official letterhead. Then I called my courier service. The next morning, the sun rose over my parents' house, casting a deceivingly peaceful glow on the manicured lawn I paid to maintain. Inside, the mood was cautiously optimistic. My mother was making pancakes, humming a hymn, convinced that Kyle's imaginary lawyers were already handling the situation. Bianca was at the table, applying lip gloss, talking about her upcoming spa day, assuming I would eventually cave and send the money. Then the doorbell rang. My mother wiped her hands on her apron and smiled. "That must be Zoe," she said confidently. "She probably came to apologize and bring the money for Bianca." I knew she would come to her senses. She opened the door, ready to accept my apology. But I was not there. Instead, a delivery man in a uniform stood on the porch, holding a stiff cardboard envelope with a red priority stripe. "Sign here, please," he said. My mother signed, her brow furrowing in confusion. She closed the door and looked at the return address. It did not say Zoe Robinson. It said Phoenix Holdings, LLC. She tore the tab on the envelope and pulled out a single crisp sheet of paper. My father and Kyle walked into the hallway, coffee mugs in hand. "What is it?" my father asked. "Is it from the bank?" My mother did not answer. Her hands started to shake, rattling the paper. Her eyes widened, scanning the text. It was a formal notice of rent increase. The bold text in the center of the page was impossible to miss. "Effective immediately, the monthly rent for this property is adjusted to current market value. The new amount due on the first of the month is $3,500. Failure to pay will result in immediate eviction proceedings." $3,500. My father gasped, snatching the paper from her hand. "We do not have that kind of money," he choked out. His pension was barely $2,000 a month. Kyle snatched the paper next, his arrogant smirk vanishing for the first time. He scanned the document, looking for a loophole for a mistake, but there were none. It was a flawless legal document. And at the bottom, signed in blue ink, was the name of the property manager. It was not a stranger. The signature was unmistakable. It was mine. The lobby of the Centurion Plaza was a cathedral of marble and glass, smelling of expensive espresso and ambition. It was the kind of place designed to make you feel small unless you owned it. And as of 3 days ago, I did own it, strictly through a shell company, of course. I walked across the polished floors, wearing my usual camouflage, a pair of faded jeans and a plain black hoodie. I was there to do a walkthrough with the building manager to discuss renovations for the lobby. But I arrived 10 minutes early to observe the flow of the tenants unannounced. I was standing near the reception desk, admiring the architectural details of the ceiling, when I heard a familiar booming voice echoing off the walls. It was Kyle. He was standing by the elevator banks flanked by two older men in sharp Italian suits. He was gesturing wildly, his gold watch catching the light, looking every bit the successful tech mogul he pretended to be. I tried to turn away to avoid a confrontation, but it was too late. He had already spotted me. His face twisted in a mix of panic and disgust. He said something quickly to the two men who looked in my direction with confusion, and then he marched toward me, his expensive loafers clicking sharply on the marble. "Zoe," he hissed when he got close enough, his voice low and venomous. "What the hell are you doing here? Did you follow me? Did your mother send you to beg for more money?" I looked at him calmly, my hands in my pockets. "I am just running some errands, Kyle," I said, keeping my voice neutral. He looked me up and down, his lip curling at my sneakers. "You look like a homeless person. This is a Class A office building. Zoe, not a soup kitchen. The cleaning staff interviews are around the back near the loading dock. If you are desperate for a job, I guess I could put in a word for you, but do not expect me to acknowledge you in public. It is embarrassing enough that I have to see you at family dinners." Before I could respond, the two men he was with walked over looking impatient. Kyle immediately straightened his posture, putting on his fake smile. "Ah, gentlemen, so sorry for the delay," he said, waving a hand dismissively at me. "Just dealing with some charity work. This poor woman was lost. I was just directing her to the service exit." One of the men looked at me with pity, giving me a small, awkward nod. Kyle laughed, a nervous sound that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You know how it is in the city?" he continued, steering them away from me. "You try to be nice to the less fortunate, and they just cling to you. Anyway, let us head up to my office. I want to show you the view from the penthouse suite. We are expanding the headquarters next month. You know, big things coming." I watched them walk away, Kyle placing a hand on the investor's back, acting like he owned the place. He did not know that I had spent the last hour reviewing the tenant ledgers for this building, and I knew something he clearly hoped I did not. His company, Nexus Tech, was not expanding. It was drowning. I pulled out my phone. I did not feel anger anymore, just a cold, clinical precision. I opened the messaging app and found the contact for Mr. Henderson, the building manager who was waiting for me in his office on the mezzanine level. I typed a simple message regarding the tenant in Unit 1500, Nexus Tech initiate lease enforcement protocol immediately. Check payment history and apply lockouts per the contract. Strict adherence. No exceptions. I watched as the three men reached the elevator bank. Kyle was still talking loud and confident, pressing the call button. The elevator arrived with a soft chime. They stepped inside. I could see Kyle reaching for his access card, specifically, the white key card that allowed access to the executive floors. He tapped it against the sensor on the control panel, expecting the light to turn green. Nothing happened. He tapped it again, harder this time. The small light on the panel blinked red. A low buzzing sound rejected his request. I saw his smile falter. The two investors exchanged a glance. Kyle laughed nervously, wiping sweat from his forehead, quietly cursing under his breath. "Just a technical glitch?" he stammered, tapping the card frantically against the reader. "Come on. Work, you stupid piece of plastic." I stood in the middle of the lobby, watching the doors remain open, refusing to take him up to his sanctuary. He stepped out of the elevator, his face flushing red, trying to wave down a security guard. "Hey," he shouted, his voice cracking slightly. "My card is not working. You guys need to fix your system. I have VIP guests here." The security guard looked down at his console, which had just received a flagged notification from the management system. I watched the guard's face change from polite indifference to professional sternness. He stepped out from behind the desk, blocking Kyle's path to the elevators. "Sir, I am afraid access to the 15th floor has been suspended administratively." Kyle's eyes bulged. "Suspended? What are you talking about? I am the CEO of the company on that floor. Turn it back on right now." At that moment, a young man in a rumpled shirt came running out of the stairwell, breathless and pale. It was Kyle's accountant. He spotted Kyle and ran over, ignoring the investors. "Boss, we have a problem," he panted loud enough for half the lobby to hear. "The internet is down, the phones are dead, and the electronic locks on the office doors just engaged. We are locked out." Kyle grabbed the accountant by the collar, roughly pushing him back. "Keep your voice down," he hissed, looking terrified at the investors, who were now backing away slowly. "What do you mean, locked out?" The accountant held up his phone, his hands shaking. "I just got an email from the building management. It says we are 3 months behind on rent, 90 days delinquent. They have exercised the lockout clause in the lease. We have 24 hours to pay $50,000, or they seize the equipment." The lobby went silent. The investors looked at Kyle with pure disdain. The tech genius. The millionaire. The man who had mocked my clothes 5 minutes ago was now standing there, exposed as a fraud. I caught Kyle's eye across the lobby. He looked at me, and for a split second he saw it, the ghost of a smile on my face. And then I turned around and walked out the front door, leaving him to explain why he couldn't afford the rent in my building. The decoy apartment I rented on the wrong side of town was designed to repel visitors, not invite them. It smelled of stale tobacco and damp drywall, a scent I endured only to maintain the illusion of my poverty. But my mother, Patricia, had never been one to let a little thing like a bad neighborhood stand in the way of her rage. The pounding on the door was so violent I thought the cheap wood would splinter before I even turned the lock. I barely cracked it open before she shoved her way inside her designer handbag, knocking against the peeling paint of the entryway wall. She looked out of place standing on the linoleum floor in her Sunday best, her chest heaving with exertion and fury. "You little witch!" she screamed, throwing her bag onto the stained sofa. "You think you can humiliate Kyle like that? You think you can send eviction notices to your own father?" She did not wait for an answer. She began pacing the small room, kicking at the piles of laundry I had strategically left on the floor. She looked at the cracked dishes in the sink and the flickering light bulb and curled her lip in disgust. "Look at how you live. Zoe, this is what you deserve, this filth. But you want to drag us down with you. You want your sister to live like this because you are bitter that she chose a winner and you chose to be nothing." I stood by the kitchenette counter, keeping my face impassive. "Mom, Kyle is not a winner," I said quietly. "He is a fraud, and the rent notice is legal. If you cannot pay, you have to leave. It is that simple, she shrieked, grabbing a ceramic mug from the counter and hurling it at the wall. Shattered inches from my head, sending shards of cheap pottery raining down onto the floor. "Do not talk to me about legal, you ungrateful child. We fed you, we clothed you, and this is how you repay us. By locking your brother-in-law out of his own office, by threatening your father with homelessness." She began to tear through the apartment like a hurricane. She swept a stack of books off the table. She pulled the cushions off the couch, searching for, I do not know what. Hidden cash, perhaps, or maybe just a way to hurt me. Then her eyes landed on the small battered laptop sitting on the coffee table. It was an old machine, heavy and thick, covered in stickers, implying it was barely functional. But I saw the greed flare in her eyes instantly. She knew that in the modern world, even poor people kept their secrets in their computers. She lunged for it. I let out a gasp that was perfectly timed, perfectly calibrated to sound like genuine panic. "No, Mom. Do not touch that," I shouted, rushing forward but stopping, just short of grabbing her. "Please, that is all I have. It has the access codes to my cryptocurrency wallet. It is the only savings I have left." The lie was delicious, and she swallowed it whole. "Cryptocurrency," she sneered, clutching the laptop to her chest, her knuckles white. "So you do have money. You have been hoarding it while your sister cries about her bills. You selfish little snake! I am taking this. We will sell whatever is on here and use it to pay that ridiculous rent you made up. Consider it a tax for your insolence. You cannot steal my computer. Mom, that is a felony, I pleaded, widening my eyes. But she was past the point of reason. She felt justified. She felt righteous. She walked up to me, the laptop tucked firmly under one arm, and with her free hand, she struck me. The sound of the slap was loud in the small room. A sharp crack that stung my cheek and brought tears to my eyes. My head snapped to the side. The physical pain was sharp, but the words she followed it with cut deeper than any knife. I wish you were never born. She spat, her voice trembling with hatred. You bring nothing but misery to this family. You are just jealous of Bianca. You have always been jealous of her happiness and her beauty. But you will never be her. You are just a sad, lonely girl trying to ruin everyone else because nobody wants you. She turned on her heel and marched out of the apartment, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. I stood there for a long moment, listening to her heels clicking down the hallway, fading into the distance. I reached up and touched my stinging cheek, feeling the heat radiating from the skin. The tears were real. The hurt was real. My own mother had just looked me in the eye and wished me out of existence. But as the silence of the apartment settled back around me, the tears stopped. My expression hardened into something cold and unrecognizable. I walked over to the window and watched her get into her car, tossing my laptop onto the passenger seat like a trophy. She had no idea that the laptop contained nothing but a dummy program designed to look like a crypto wallet filled with worthless code intended to track whoever tried to access it. She had no idea she had just committed grand larceny and burglary in front of a hidden camera I had installed in the smoke detector. I picked up my phone. My hand was steady. I did not call my dad. I did not call Bianca. I dialed 3 digits. That would change everything. 911. What is your emergency? The operator asked. I took a deep breath, letting the wobble back into my voice, just enough to sound like a victim. I would like to report a break-in and a theft, I said clearly. My mother just broke into my home, assaulted me and stole my computer. I want to press charges immediately. The morning sun did not bring relief to the house on Maple Street. Instead, it brought a man with a face like stone standing on the porch, holding a thick packet of documents. He did not wait for a polite greeting. He simply asked, "Are you Marcus Robinson?" And when my father nodded, the man thrust the heavy legal binder into his trembling hands and said, "You have been served," before turning and walking away without looking back. My father stared at the cover page and his knees actually gave out, forcing him to collapse onto the foyer bench, gasping for air. The document was titled, "Civil Lawsuit for Unpaid Back Rent and Damages. Plaintiff Phoenix Holdings, LLC Defendant, Marcus and Patricia Robinson." He flipped to the summary page, his eyes widening in horror as he read the numbers. $288,000 plus legal fees, bringing the total to over $300,000. It was the accumulation of 8 years of living rent-free, calculated at fair market rate plus interest. While my father was hyperventilating over the debt, my sister Bianca was facing a tragedy of her own making in the living room. She was sitting on the sofa, surrounded by open browser tabs on her phone, trying to order a rush delivery of a designer dress. To soothe her nerves, she hit purchase and waited for the confirmation, expecting the usual dopamine hit of spending money. Instead, a big red notification appeared on the screen saying, "Transaction declined." She frowned, thinking it was a glitch, and tried again, harder this time, but the result was the same. She called the credit card company, putting it on speakerphone so everyone could hear her indignation, intending to yell at a customer service representative. But she never got the chance. "I am sorry, ma'am," the automated voice said. "This card has been reported lost or stolen by the primary account holder, Zoe Robinson. The account is closed." Bianca let out a scream that sounded more like a wounded animal than a human being. She threw the phone across the room, hitting the wall with a thud. "She cut me off," she shrieked, tears streaming down her perfectly contoured face. "That jealous witch cut off my emergency card. How am I supposed to survive? I have nothing to wear for the hearing. with no money and a massive lawsuit hanging over their heads. My family reverted to their oldest and most effective tactic: public victimization. They knew they could not win in a court of law, so they decided to win in the court of public opinion. They dressed in their finest Sunday clothes despite it being a Tuesday and marched down to the First Baptist Church. They knew that in our community the church was the center of influence, and Pastor Jenkins held more sway than any judge. My mother, Patricia, played her part perfectly. She walked into the pastor's office clutching a handkerchief, her eyes red and swollen from crying, real tears of self-pity. She threw herself onto the leather chair, sobbing about how her own daughter was trying to make them homeless in their old age, simply because she was bitter and unloved. Kyle stood behind her, shaking his head, murmuring about how he had tried to reason with me, but I was possessed by greed and resentment. My father sat with his head in his hands, looking frail and defeated, posing as the hard-working patriarch betrayed by his offspring. They spun a web of lies so thick it practically choked the air in the room. They told Pastor Jenkins that I had forged the deed, that I was abusing them financially, that I had turned my back on God's commandments to honor my father and mother. They painted me as a monster, a prodigal daughter who had returned only to destroy the family foundation. Pastor Jenkins, a man who had known me since I was a child, listened with growing horror, believing every word, because who would lie about something so terrible in the house of the Lord? The phone rang in my office an hour later. I saw the caller ID and knew exactly what was happening. It was the church office. I answered, my voice calm and steady. Zoe. The pastor's voice was deep and filled with disappointed judgment. Your mother and father are here. They are distraught. We need to talk immediately. I cannot sit by and watch a child dishonor her parents like this. The Bible says clearly that we must care for our elders, not drag them into court. I cut him off gently before he could launch into a sermon. Pastor, I understand what you have been told. I really do. When would you like me to come in? He sounded surprised by my compliance, perhaps expecting me to scream or hang up. Tonight, he said firmly. After choir practice. Come to my office. We are going to have a family mediation, and you are going to make this right, or we will have to discuss your standing in this community. I hung up the phone and looked at the stack of documents on my desk. I picked up a black binder. It was 3 inches thick and heavy as a brick. Inside were the bank transfer records showing every mortgage payment I had made for 8 years, the original sale deed from the foreclosure auction that my father had signed, the emails from Kyle trying to blackmail me, and the high-definition video footage of my mother breaking into my apartment and stealing my laptop. I ran my hand over the cool cover of the binder. I was not going to a mediation. I was going to a revelation. I drove to the church, seeing my parents' car parked in the front row like they owned the place. I walked up the stone steps, the heavy binder weighing down my arm, but making my spirit feel lighter than air. I pushed open the heavy oak doors, ready to show the shepherd that his sheep were actually wolves in designer clothing. The pastor's office was smaller than the sanctuary, but it felt infinitely more intimidating, filled with the scent of old leather and moral judgment. Pastor Jenkins sat behind his massive mahogany desk, looking at me over the rim of his spectacles, like I was a sinner in need of immediate repentance. My parents sat on the plush guest chairs to his right, creating a united front of geriatric vulnerability. My mother, Patricia, was holding a tissue to her nose, letting out soft, rhythmic sobs that I recognized immediately as her sympathy. Seeking performance tactic. My father, Marcus, sat with his head bowed, looking at the floor, playing the part of the broken patriarch perfectly. Kyle stood behind them, his hand resting protectively on my mother's shoulder, radiating an aura of smug superiority that made my stomach churn. Zoe, the pastor, began, his voice deep and resonating with practiced authority. We have been praying for you. Your parents have told me everything. They told me how you forged documents, how you are trying to evict them from the family home they have owned for decades. It is a grave sin to dishonor those who gave you life. The commandment is clear. Honor thy father and mother. I stood quietly clutching my heavy binder, waiting for him to finish. He went on for another 5 minutes, quoting scripture and questioning my soul, asking how money could have hardened my heart so thoroughly. When he finally paused for breath, Kyle stepped forward, smoothing his expensive suit jacket. "Pastor, if I may," Kyle said, his voice dripping with fake benevolence. "We are not looking for revenge here. We are a forgiving family. We understand that Zoe might be having some mental health issues or financial trouble that led her to this desperation." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper. He slid it across the desk toward me. I looked down. It was a quitclaim deed transferring ownership of the property back to Marcus and Patricia Robinson. "Zoe." Kyle continued smiling that shark-like smile of his. "We are prepared to drop the lawsuit and the harassment charges. If you sign this right now and return the title to its rightful owners, we will pretend this ugly chapter never happened. We will even let you come to Sunday dinner again eventually, once you have made amends." My mother looked up from her tissue, her eyes wet and hopeful. "Just sign it, Zoe," she whimpered. "Please, just give us our house back and stop this madness. Why do you hate us so much?" The room went silent, waiting for my capitulation. They expected me to crumble under the weight of the church, the family, and the guilt. But they had forgotten that I was no longer the little girl who cried when she was scolded. I was a businesswoman who had survived in a cutthroat industry, and I had brought my own ammunition. I stepped forward, bypassing the quitclaim deed and placing my black binder onto the pastor's desk. With a heavy thud, I opened it slowly, deliberately. The first page was a high-resolution copy of a foreclosure notice from the county sheriff dated November 2015. "Pastor Jenkins," I said, my voice steady and clear, "before you ask me to sign away my property, perhaps you should ask my father why the sheriff was at his door 8 years ago." The pastor frowned, looking down at the document. "What is this?" he asked. I flipped the page, revealing the second document. It was a sale deed notarized and stamped with the official county seal. "This is the sale agreement," I continued. "My father did not pay off his mortgage in '98 as he claims. He refinanced 3 times to pay for bad investments and vacations. In 2015, and the bank was 30 days away from putting them on the street. I stepped in. I negotiated with the bank, paid off the arrears, and bought the house outright." I pointed to a specific line on the document. "Look at the sale price." "Pastor." The pastor leaned in, adjusting his glasses. He squinted at the line I was pointing to. $1. He read aloud, clearly, confused. $1. "Yes," I said, looking directly at my father, who was now refusing to lift his head. "My father sold me the house for $1 to avoid bankruptcy. I agreed to let them stay there, rent-free indefinitely, as long as they paid the utilities and taxes. But they did not even do that." I flipped to the next section, showing years of tax payments made from my personal account. "I have paid the property taxes, the insurance, and the repairs for 8 years. That totals over $200,000 of support." I turned to Kyle, who looked like he had just swallowed a lemon. "So you see, Kyle," I said, my voice hardening, "I cannot give the house back because they never owned it in the first place. Not for the last decade. And as for my mental health, I think the only insanity here is that I let them live there for free while they treated me like a servant." My mother stopped crying. Her tissue fell to her lap. She looked at my father, waiting for him to explode, to deny it, to yell that I was a liar. But Marcus said nothing. He shrank into his chair, looking smaller and older than I had ever seen him. Pastor Jenkins looked up from the binder, his face pale. He looked at the undeniable government stamps, the signatures, the bank records. Then he slowly turned his head toward my father. The judgment that had been directed at me just moments ago shifted, hanging heavy in the air like storm clouds. "Marcus, the pastor asked, his voice losing its booming authority and becoming very quiet. Is this true? Did you sell the house to your daughter? My father opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He looked at Kyle, desperate for a lifeline, but Kyle was busy backing away, pretending to check his phone. The silence stretched out, painful and absolute, confirming everything I had just said. The elders in the room began to whisper among themselves, and for the first time in my life, I saw the tide turning not out of love, but out of the undeniable weight of the truth. The humiliation at the church should have been a wake-up call for my brother-in-law. But for a narcissist like Kyle, exposure is not a lesson, it is a declaration of war. He left that meeting with Pastor Jenkins, seething with a cold, vindictive rage, refusing to speak to my parents on the ride home. He could not accept that the sister-in-law he had mocked for years was actually the one holding the keys to his life. He convinced himself that there had to be a dirty secret behind my success. He told himself that a black woman from my background could not possibly acquire real estate legally without cutting corners or breaking the law. So the next morning, instead of looking for a job to pay off his debts, he took the last $500 from his joint account with Bianca and hired a private investigator. He went to a seedy office downtown expecting to buy dirt. He wanted photographs of me dealing drugs. He wanted proof that I was an escort. He wanted anything that would destroy my reputation and allow him to blackmail me into silence. He sat across from the investigator, a cynical man named Miller, tapping his foot impatiently, just waiting for the smoking gun. I found plenty on her, Miller told him, tossing a thick manila envelope onto the desk. But it is not what you think. She is not selling drugs, kid. She is buying the city. Kyle tore open the envelope, his eyes scanning the documents frantically, expecting police records. Instead, he found corporate filings. The investigator pointed to a list of companies: Phoenix Holdings, LLC, Obsidian Ventures, Bluestone Properties. They are all her, Miller explained. She is the sole proprietor of 15 commercial buildings in the downtown district plus 3 multi-family units in the suburbs. She is not just solvent, she is a whale. Her net worth is in the mid-8 figures. Conservative estimate. Kyle stared at the paper, his mouth dry. The anger that had been fueling him suddenly evaporated, replaced by a hunger so intense, it made him dizzy. 15 buildings. He did the mental math quickly, realizing that I was not just rich, I was wealthier than anyone he had ever met. The realization shifted his entire strategy. In an instant, he decided that exposing me was a waste of resources. Destroying me was short-sighted. If he destroyed me, he got nothing. But if he controlled me, he got everything. He made a calculated decision, right then and there. He would not tell my parents or Bianca about the extent of my wealth. If they knew, they would just want the house back, or they would beg for handouts, and Kyle did not want handouts. He wanted the empire. He looked at the investigator and said, "Keep this between us." That evening, I was leaving my actual office. The headquarters of Phoenix Holdings, located on the top floor of a building I had purchased 3 years ago. I walked out of the elevator, and there he was, leaning against the reception desk, holding a bouquet of expensive white lilies. He had shaved, he was wearing his best suit, and he had practiced his expression in the mirror until it looked like the picture of contrition. "Zoe," he said, stepping forward, his voice soft and humble. "I have been waiting for you." I stopped, clutching my briefcase, looking at him with suspicion. "What do you want, Kyle?" I asked. "I am not signing the house over." He shook his head, looking pained. No, I do not want that. I came to apologize truly. The way I acted at the church, the things I said, I was stressed, I was jealous, and I was wrong. You have to understand, I have been under so much pressure trying to provide for Bianca, and I took it out on you. It was unmanly, and I am ashamed. He held out the flowers. I did not take them, so he placed them gently on the desk. He looked around the lobby, his eyes greedy, taking in the marble and the glass. "I know everything, Zoe," he said, dropping his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "I hired someone I know about the LLCs. I know about the 15 buildings. I know you are. Phoenix Holdings." I stiffened, ready to call security, but Kyle held up his hands in surrender. "I am not going to tell anyone," he promised. "I did not tell your mom. I did not tell Bianca. They would not understand. They would just try to bleed you dry. But I understand. I am a businessman, Zoe, just like you. And when I saw that list of properties, I realized something. You have done an amazing job accumulating these assets, but you are overwhelmed. I can see it. You are managing all this alone, hiding in the shadows." He took a step closer, invading my personal space, his eyes gleaming with a predatory light. "You are brilliant, Zoe. But you are just one woman, and frankly, you got lucky with the market timing. But luck runs out. You need professional management, need a face for the company, someone who knows how to talk to the big banks and the institutional investors, someone who looks the part." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a leather-bound folder, opening it to reveal a contract. It was a power of attorney agreement, granting full management rights of my assets to Nexus Tech, his bankrupt company. "I want to help you," he said, a smile spreading across his face that was meant to be charming, but looked like a trap. "Let me take the burden off your shoulders. We can be partners. I will manage the portfolio. I will handle the tenants and the legal side, and you can just sit back and enjoy the money. You have done the hard part. Now, let a man handle the heavy lifting. Just sign here, and we can double your net worth in a year." I looked at the pen he was holding out to me, and then I looked at his face. He truly believed that I was stupid enough to fall for it. He truly believed that, because I was a woman, I was desperate for his guidance. He did not see a CEO standing in front of him. He saw a lottery winner who needed a guardian. And as I looked at that contract, I realized that Kyle was not just a nuisance. He was a parasite trying to burrow his way into the bloodstream of my hard work. The grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton was a sea of silk gowns and black tuxedos, shimmering under the light of crystal chandeliers. It was the kind of event where a single ticket cost more than my parents' mortgage payment for a year, and for my sister Bianca and her husband Kyle, being here was not a luxury. It was a desperate gamble. They had borrowed $5,000 from a predatory lender at an interest rate that would make a mobster blush, just to buy 2 general admission tickets, hoping to find a wealthy savior. They stood near the buffet table, clutching their champagne flutes like lifelines, their eyes scanning the room for anyone with a checkbook who might save their sinking ship. I arrived 20 minutes late, not because I was disorganized, but because the mayor had asked to ride in my limousine to discuss zoning laws for the new waterfront district. As we walked through the massive double doors, the room seemed to turn toward us. Photographers flashed their bulbs, capturing the moment the city's political leader walked arm in arm with the mysterious developer who was reshaping the skyline. I was wearing a floor-length emerald gown that had been tailored in Paris, a far cry from the thrift store rags my family was used to seeing me in, and I wore it like armor. Across the room, I saw Bianca freeze mid-sip. She grabbed Kyle's arm, her nails digging into his suit jacket hard enough to bruise. "Look at her," she hissed, loud enough for the people around them to turn and stare. "How did she get in here? Did she sneak in behind the catering staff? Look at that dress. It must be a knockoff. She is trying to embarrass us. Kyle, do something." Bianca was never one to suffer in silence, especially not when the spotlight was on someone else, fueled by jealousy, and the alcohol she had been drinking on an empty stomach. She began to march across the ballroom floor, weaving through the crowd like a heat-seeking missile. Her face was twisted in a snarl of entitlement, blinding her to reality. She did not see the mayor. She did not see the heavy security detail. She only saw her older sister shining in a way she never could. She reached a waiter's tray, snatched a full glass of red wine and lunged toward me, intending to ruin my dress and my night in one fluid motion. But she never got close. Two men in dark suits stepped out from the shadows, moving with the speed and precision of highly trained operatives. One of them caught her wrist mid-swing, sending the wine splashing harmlessly onto the polished floor, while the other blocked her path completely, making her look like an unruly child throwing a tantrum. "Let me go!" she shrieked, trying to pull her arm free, causing a scene that silenced the orchestra. "That woman is a fraud. She is my sister and she does not belong here. Throw her out." The room went deadly silent. The mayor looked at me, raising an eyebrow, silently asking if I needed assistance or if he should intervene. I stepped forward, signaling the guards to release her. But to keep their distance, I looked down at Bianca, who was panting and red-faced, her dress stained with the drops of wine she had meant for me, and I felt absolutely nothing but pity. "Bianca," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the silent room. "This is the Platinum VIP section. Your tickets are general admission, standing room only. You are in the wrong tax bracket for this conversation. Security, please escort her back to the economy zone where she belongs." The laughter that rippled through the crowd was not loud, but it was devastating. It was the polite, dismissive laughter of the ultra-wealthy, directed at someone who had tried too hard and failed. Bianca turned pale, realizing that the elite of the city were not looking at her with admiration, but with second-hand embarrassment. She stumbled back, retreating to where Kyle was hiding by the shrimp cocktail, trying to pretend he did not know her. Kyle, desperate to salvage the night and terrified of the loan sharks waiting for his payment, turned to an older gentleman standing next to him, hoping to strike up a conversation and ignore the disaster. It was Mr. Sterling, the venture capitalist Kyle had been trying to email for months. "Mr. Sterling," Kyle said, putting on his best fake smile. "So sorry about the commotion. My wife is just passionate. Say, have you heard about the new tech opportunities in the sector? I have a pitch deck that would blow your mind." Mr. Sterling looked at Kyle with a mixture of amusement and boredom, swirling the ice in his glass, getting ready to walk away until he saw who Kyle was looking at. He followed Kyle's gaze to where I was standing, laughing with the mayor and shaking hands with the city council. "Oh, you are pitching tech," Mr. Sterling said, a strange smile playing on his lips. "Well, you are talking to the wrong person, son. You see that woman over there, the one your wife just tried to assault? That is Zoe Brooks. She is the shark we have all been waiting for tonight. If you want funding in this town, nothing moves unless she signs the check first." The call came at 3 in the morning, shattering the silence of my apartment. It was my mother, Patricia, screaming so loud the distortion cracked the speaker on my phone. "Zoe, get to the East Side Medical Center immediately. It is Bianca. She fell down the stairs. She is bleeding, Zoe. She is losing the baby." The words hit me like a physical blow. I did not know Bianca was pregnant. Nobody did. I threw on a trench coat over my pajamas, grabbed my keys, and drove like a maniac, red lights blurring in my vision. For all the bad blood between us, for all the insults and the lawsuits, the idea of an innocent child being lost was enough to make me forget the war for a moment. I arrived at the clinic breathless, expecting to see a trauma team. Instead, I found my family. Huddled in a private waiting room that looked suspiciously like a business office. My mother was pacing, wringing her hands theatrically, while Kyle sat with his head in his hands, looking devastated. "You caused this," Patricia shrieked, the moment she saw me. "You and your lawsuits." The stress was too much for her body. She was 12 weeks along, and she did not tell anyone because she was afraid of the evil eye. But now, thanks to you pushing us out on the street, she fell. She fainted from the anxiety and tumbled down the porch steps. I looked at Kyle. "Is she okay? Is the baby okay?" Kyle looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. "We do not know yet. The doctor says she needs an emergency circlage procedure to save the pregnancy. But there is a problem." This clinic is out of network for our insurance. They require an upfront payment guarantee before they take her into surgery. He shoved a clipboard into my hands, his fingers trembling. Please, Zoe. I know we have our differences, but this is my child. This is your niece or nephew. Just sign the guarantor form. It is just a formality to show we have the funds backing us. I will pay you back as soon as my settlement comes in. Just sign it so they can operate. I looked down at the paper. The header did not say, East Side Medical Center. Patient admission. It said, promissory note. Personal liability. Waiver in bold letters. It was a loan document, plain and simple, structured to attach to my credit score immediately. The amount listed was $40,000. My instincts, which had been honed by years of reviewing contracts, screamed at me. I looked at the doctor standing by the door, tapping on a tablet. He was wearing a white coat, but it looked ill-fitting, and his name tag was crooked. Dr. David Miller. I squinted. I knew that face. It was not from a medical board website. It was from Kyle's Instagram feed. This was Dave, the guy Kyle played poker with on Thursday nights. Dave, who I was pretty sure was a chiropractor, not an obstetrician. Can I see her? I asked, keeping my steady only family. Kyle started to say, but I pushed past him and the fake doctor shoving open the door to the examination room. Bianca was lying on the bed, hooked up to a monitor that was beeping rhythmically. She had a bandage around her head and was moaning softly. But when she saw me, she immediately grabbed her stomach. Oh, Zoe, it hurts, she whimpered. You did this to me. I pulled out my phone. I did not open the camera app to take a picture. I opened Instagram. Swipe right. Live. I held the phone up, framing the room perfectly, capturing Bianca on the bed, Kyle hovering nervously, and Dr. Dave trying to look professional. So let me get this straight, I said loudly, addressing the phone, but looking at the doctor. Dr. Dave, is it? You are recommending a $40,000 emergency surgery for my sister? Based on a fall. Dave looked at the phone, thinking. I was just recording for posterity. Yes. Absolutely critical condition, he stammered, sweating slightly. And you are an OB/GYN? I asked, stepping closer, zooming in on his face. Well, I am a medical professional, he said evasively. Really? I said because I am pretty sure I saw you doing keg stands at Kyle's birthday party last month. And I am also pretty sure this monitor is not even connected to her. I reached over and followed the wire from the heart rate monitor. It was plugged into a demo mode outlet on the wall. I yanked it out. The beeping continued, steady and perfect, confirming it was a pre-recorded loop. Bianca sat up abruptly, dropping the act. What are you doing? Put the phone away. And this form. I continued holding the clipboard up to the camera lens. This is not a medical release. It is a high-interest personal loan application designed to pay off gambling debts labeled as medical expenses. Is that right, Kyle? Is $40,000 exactly what you owe the bookies? Kyle lunged for me. Turn it off, Zoe. Are you crazy? Dave, the fake doctor backed away, holding up his hands. Look, I did not sign anything. Kyle just said he needed a favor to scare his sister-in-law into signing a paper. I did not know you were live streaming. The room went deadly silent except for the fake beeping of the monitor. I turned the screen around so Bianca could see herself. The viewer count was climbing rapidly. 200, 500, 1,000. Her followers, her fans. The people she had cultivated for years as a lifestyle influencer were watching her fake a pregnancy to scam her sister. Bianca screamed a high-pitched sound of pure horror, not because of the baby that never existed, but because she saw the comments rolling in faster than she could read them. Fake liar scammer unfollowed. I ended the stream and looked at my sister, who was now frantically trying to hide her face under the sheets. You wanted to be famous. Bianca, I said, tossing the clipboard onto the floor. Well, you just went viral. Good luck explaining this to your sponsors. The illusion of the tech mogul finally shattered completely at 2 in the morning on a rainy Tuesday inside the cold leather interior of a leased luxury car that was scheduled for repossession. Kyle was not sitting in a boardroom closing deals. He was huddled in the driver's seat, shaking uncontrollably as a voice on the other end of the phone delivered a death sentence. The voice did not belong to a banker or an investor. It belonged to a man named Vargas, who collected debts for people who did not believe in credit scores or payment plans. 48 hours. Kyle Vargas said, his voice calm and metallic like a grinding gear. You owe us $500,000, principal plus interest. You have 48 hours to wire the funds. Or we stop asking nicely and start taking payments in bone and cartilage. Do not try to run. We know where your wife shops. We know where her parents live. The line went dead, leaving Kyle alone with the terrifying silence of his own failure. He was a rat in a maze, with no cheese, only traps. He had gambled everything on the appearance of success, borrowing from dangerous men to fund a lifestyle he could not afford, hoping that one of his fake startups would miraculously turn a profit. But the house of cards had collapsed, and now he was facing physical dismemberment. He needed $500,000, and he needed it now. Desperation turned his fear into something darker, something malignant. He realized there was only one pot of gold left to raid, and he would have to burn down the entire family tree to get to it. He drove to my parents' house, arriving just as the sun was beginning to bleed through the gray clouds. He did not go there to confess his sins or to ask for help. He went there to commit his final and most heinous act of betrayal. He found them in the living room, the atmosphere thick with the gloom of their impending eviction. My father, Marcus, looked 10 years older, sitting in his armchair staring at the wall, while my mother Patricia muttered to herself about the unfairness of life, holding a rosary beads with white-knuckled grip. Kyle fell to his knees in front of them, summoning tears that were actually born of his own terror, but looked convincing enough to my gullible parents. "Zoe is destroying us," he sobbed, burying his face in his hands. "She is not just taking the house. She is ruining my reputation. She is contacting my investors, spreading lies. My company is dead because of her. I have lost everything trying to fight for you." My mother reached out and touched his hair, her maternal instinct overriding her logic. "Oh, Kyle, my poor boy," she cooed. "It is that wicked girl. She is possessed by greed." Kyle looked up, his eyes wild with urgency. "But I found a way to stop her. Mom, Dad, listen to me. I found a way to save the house and get back everything she stole, plus millions more in damages. We can fix this today, but we have to be brave." My father perked up, looking at him with desperate hope. How he asked, his voice raspy. "We have no money for lawyers. We do not need money. We need the truth." Kyle lied, gripping my father's knee. "We sue her. Not for the deed. That is a civil matter. We sue her for elderly financial abuse. It is a specific crime. We tell the court she manipulated you, confused you, and tricked you into signing those papers because of your age. We tell them she took advantage of your declining health to steal your assets." My father hesitated, pulling back slightly. "But that is a lie," he mumbled. "She did not trick us. I signed them because the bank was coming." Kyle grabbed his shoulders hard, shaking him slightly. "Do you want to live under a bridge, Marcus? Because that is where you are going in 2 days. Do you want to die on the street while your daughter lives in a penthouse? If we file this claim, the court freezes her assets immediately. It is automatic. She will not be able to access her bank accounts or her properties. She will be paralyzed. She will have to settle. She will have to pay us millions just to make it go away fast." The seed of greed was planted in fertile soil. My mother's eyes lit up at the word millions. She looked at my father, giving him a sharp nod. "We have to do it, Marcus. She abandoned us. She deserves to pay. It took less than an hour for their morality to crumble completely under the weight of their fear. They signed the affidavits Kyle had typed up on his phone. They signed their names next to lies that painted me as a predator and them as helpless, confused victims. They drove to the courthouse that very morning. My mother wearing her most fragile-looking cardigan, my father walking with a cane he did not actually need. Playing the part perfectly, they filed the motions seeking an emergency injunction and damages. They were suing their own flesh and blood for $5 million, alleging that I had abused their trust and stolen their livelihood. I was in the middle of a high-stakes meeting with the city zoning board when my assistant walked in, her face pale and unreadable. She did not speak, she just placed a hand on my shoulder and whispered, "Zoe, there is a process server here. He says it is urgent." I excused myself and walked out to the reception area. The man standing there looked apologetic, this time. He knew who I was, and he seemed almost embarrassed to be the bearer of this particular burden. He handed me the thick packet of legal documents. "I am sorry, Ms. Brooks," he said softly. I looked at the cover sheet. Marcus and Patricia Robinson versus Zoe Brooks. Cause of action: elder abuse, fraud, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. I read the accusations. I read how I supposedly tormented them, how I tricked them, how I left them destitute while hoarding wealth. Any other daughter might have cried reading those hateful lies crafted by the people who raised her. Any other woman might have called them begging for a truce, terrified of the stigma. But I just felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. This was it, the final severing of the cord, the last bridge burning down, illuminating the dark reality of who they really were. I looked up at the server, and a slow, cold smile spread across my face. It was not a smile of happiness. It was the smile of a general who just watched the enemy march blindly into a minefield, expecting a victory parade. "It is fine," I said, my voice steady as steel. "They want a court battle. Let us go to court." The preparation for the trial was a tale of two very different worlds, operating on two very different moral frequencies. On one side of town in a strip mall office, sandwiched between a pawn shop and a liquor store, my family huddled around a stained conference table with their chosen legal counsel. His name was Barry, and his primary qualification was that he accepted payment in the form of a post-dated check and a promise of a percentage of the settlement. Barry wore a suit that was 2 sizes too big and smelled faintly of cigarette smoke and desperation. But to my family, he was a gladiator. He was the man who was going to slay the dragon that was their daughter. Kyle took the lead, acting more like a theater director than a plaintiff. He was pacing the small room, coaching my parents on their performance for the courtroom. "Mom, you need to cry sooner," he instructed, leaning over her. "Look at the jury. When you say the word betrayal, and make sure your hands are shaking, it makes you look more vulnerable, more sympathetic." He turned to my father, pushing a glass of water toward him. "Dad, remember the strategy? If they ask you about the sale documents from 2015, you do not remember signing them. You were confused. You were under medication. You felt pressured. The key word is duress. Do not deviate from the script." My mother nodded, wiping imaginary tears from her eyes, practicing her look of devastation. "I just want my baby girl to come back to Jesus." She rehearsed, her voice trembling with a terrifyingly authentic quiver. She had convinced herself so thoroughly of her own victimhood that the lies tasted like truth in her mouth. My father sat silently staring at his hands, looking less like a victim and more like a man who had lost his soul, but he nodded along, agreeing to perjure himself to save his pride. They spent hours in that dingy office, crafting a narrative where I was a monster who had preyed on their senility, unaware that they were digging their own graves with every fabricated detail. Meanwhile, across the city, in a glass-walled boardroom on the 45th floor of the Skyline Tower, I sat with a very different kind of legal team. My lawyer was named Harrison, a man whose billable hourly rate could have paid off my parents' debts in a week. He did not smell like smoke. He smelled of expensive cologne and victory. The table in front of us was not covered in fast food wrappers, but in neat stacks of evidence files and digital forensic reports. Harrison looked at me, his expression serious and focused. "Zoe, they are going to play the age card heavily," he said, tapping a pen against his chin. "They are going to claim diminished capacity and undue influence. It is a," she said situation regarding what happened inside that house 8 years ago unless we have something concrete to prove their state of mind at the time or proof of their current malicious intent. It could get messy. Juries are unpredictable when it comes to elderly parents crying on the stand." I stared out the window at the city below, feeling a heaviness in my chest. It was the weight of the final secret I had kept. The one thing I had never told anyone, not even Bianca. I reached into my purse and pulled out a small black USB drive. I placed it on the polished mahogany table, sliding it across to Harrison. "I installed a security system in the house 3 years ago," I said quietly. My voice sounded hollow in the large room. After a string of break-ins in the neighborhood, I wanted to make sure they were safe. I put cameras in the living room, the kitchen, and the hallway. They connect to a cloud server that only I have access to. They do not know the cameras record audio. Harrison stopped tapping his pen. He looked at the drive and then back at me. "Do you have footage of them discussing the lawsuit?" he asked. I nodded. My throat felt tight. "I have everything, Harrison. I have them plotting with Kyle. I have them admitting that the elder abuse claim is a fabrication designed to freeze my assets. I have my mother laughing about how much money they are going to get. I have my father practicing his confused act just like Kyle taught him. It is all there, every word of their conspiracy, recorded in high definition." Harrison picked up the drive, plugging it into his laptop with a swift professional motion. He opened the files, clicking on the most recent video dated just 2 days prior. The sound of my mother's voice filled the boardroom sharp and clear, saying, "We have to do it, Marcus. She abandoned us. She deserves to pay." Followed by Kyle's voice saying, "We tell the court, she manipulated you." I watched Harrison's face transform. The professional concern evaporated, replaced by a look of absolute predatory confidence. He watched 5 minutes of the footage, listening to my family dismantle their own case with their own mouths. He closed the laptop slowly, a small, cold smile playing on his lips. He looked at me, and the intensity in his eyes gave me chills. "Zoe, this is not just a defense strategy anymore," he said, leaning forward, his voice dropping to a low rumble. "This is a nuclear option. We are not just going to win this case. We are going to countersue for malicious prosecution, defamation, and conspiracy to commit fraud. By the time we are done with them, they will not just lose the lawsuit. They will be facing criminal charges. We are going to make sure they lose absolutely everything." The courtroom was artificially cold, but the heat radiating from the plaintiff's table felt like a physical weight pressing against my chest. My family had dressed for the occasion, not as the affluent pretenders they usually were, but as humble victims of a cruel world. My mother, Patricia, wore a faded blue cardigan that I had not seen in years, likely pulled from the back of a closet to suggest frailty. My father, Marcus, slumped in his chair looking at his hands, his cane propped prominently against the table leg. And then there was Kyle, sitting upright in a suit that was modest, by his standards. His face a mask of righteous sorrow. He looked like a grieving son, fighting for justice, rather than a con artist, fighting for his life. The bailiff called the court to order, and the proceedings began with a theatrical flair that made my stomach turn. Kyle was the first witness called to the stand. He walked to the witness box with a slow, deliberate gait, swearing on the Bible with a solemnity that would have been convincing if I did not know he had sold his soul long ago. He sat down, adjusted the microphone, and looked directly at the jury, ignoring me completely. "Mr. Jenkins, tell the court what happened on the night of November 14th, 2015. The family lawyer Barry asked, his voice trembling slightly with feigned emotion. Kyle took a deep breath, letting it shudder out for effect. "We were having a family dinner." He began, his voice low and steady. "Zoe came over, which was unusual because she had been distant. She said she wanted to help Mom and Dad with their finances. She brought over some herbal tea. She said it would help them relax." He paused, looking down at his hands as if the memory was too painful to speak. "I remember thinking the tea smelled strange, a bit chemical. But we trusted her. She is family." My in-laws drank it, and within 20 minutes they were slurring their words. They were dizzy, disoriented. They could barely keep their heads up. That is when Zoe pulled out the papers. She put a pen in Marcus' hand and guided it across the page. He did not know what he was signing. He thought he was signing a birthday card for her. He was crying, asking why the room was spinning. A gasp rippled through the jury box. I watched the jurors' faces turn toward me, their expressions morphing from curiosity to absolute disgust. To them, I was a monster, a predator who had drugged her own elderly parents to steal their home. I sat frozen, my hands clasped tightly in my lap underneath the table. I dug my fingernails into my palms until I felt the sharp bite of pain, using it to ground myself in reality. The lie was so audacious, so detailed, that it almost commanded respect for its creativity. Then it was my mother's turn to react. As Kyle described the alleged drugging, Patricia let out a wail. It was a high, thin sound of pure anguish. She buried her face in a handkerchief, her shoulders shaking violently. "Oh, my poor Marcus," she sobbed loud enough for the court reporter to pause typing. "My poor husband. He trusted her." The judge glanced over, looking sympathetic. Someone brought my mother a glass of water. She took it with trembling hands, looking at me over the rim with eyes that were not sad, but triumphant. She was winning. She could feel the room swaying to their side, and she was reveling in it. I looked at them, really looked at them, for the first time in years. I did not see my parents anymore, did not see the people who raised me or the sister I had shared a room with. I saw strangers consumed by a parasitic need for money and status. My heart broke in that moment, not a loud shattering but a quiet final fracture. The last thread of hope that they might love me unconditionally snapped, leaving me cold and empty. But in that emptiness I found a steel spine. I was not going to cry. I was not going to beg. Harrison. My lawyer sat beside me perfectly still. He had not objected once during Kyle's testimony. He had let the lie expand, filling the room like a toxic gas. He waited until Kyle had finished painting me as the villain, until the jury hated me, until the judge was looking at me with veiled contempt. When it was finally our turn for cross-examination, Harrison did not walk toward the witness stand. He stood up slowly, buttoning his suit jacket with a precise, confident movement. He looked at the judge, and then he looked at Kyle, who was bracing himself for a verbal attack. "Your Honor, Harrison," said his voice, projecting to the back of the room without shouting. "We have no questions for the witness regarding his recollection of the tea or the signing of the documents." Kyle blinked, confused. He had rehearsed answers for every question he thought we would ask. However, Harrison continued, walking toward the center of the courtroom. "We do have a submission for the court intended to impeach the credibility of the witness and the plaintiffs entirely." He turned to the bailiff, holding up a small black flash drive. "Your Honor, I would like to present Exhibit A to the court. This is digital forensic evidence recovered from a cloud server recorded inside the plaintiff's home 48 hours ago. It directly contradicts the sworn testimony we just heard." Kyle's face went pale. The smirk vanished. My mother stopped crying, mid-sob. The room went deadly silent, the air thick with the electricity of a storm about to break. Harrison plugged the drive into the court's presentation system and looked at me, giving a nearly imperceptible nod. The trap was set and they had walked right into it. Harrison pressed the enter key on his laptop, and the large monitors mounted on the courtroom walls flickered to life. The video was grainy black and white, but the audio was crystal clear, recorded by high-fidelity microphones I had installed in the smoke detectors years ago. The courtroom watched in stunned silence as the screen showed my parents' living room, the very room where they claimed to be victims of elder abuse. On screen, Kyle was pacing back and forth holding a glass of scotch, looking not like a concerned son-in-law, but like a ringmaster conducting a circus of deceit. His voice boomed through the speakers, sending a chill down everyone's spine. "Listen to me, Marcus," he said on the recording, pointing a finger at my father. "You do not need to remember anything. In fact, it is better if you are confused. The courts love a confused old man. Just say you were scared. Just say she pressured you. Once the judge freezes her assets, we force a settlement. We take the cash. We take back the house, and then we kick Zoe out on the street where she belongs." Then came my mother's voice, clear and vindictive. "I just want her to pay, Kyle. She thinks she is better than us. Make her pay, and make sure we get enough to cover Bianca's credit cards." The video ended, and for a heartbeat, there was absolute silence. Then the dam broke. The jurors gasped, looking from the screen to the defense table with expressions of pure revulsion. The stenographer stopped typing, her mouth slightly open. My mother put her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with the realization that her private malice had just been broadcast to the world. My father slumped forward, burying his head in his arms, unable to look at the judge. Judge Vance was not a man known for his temper, but as he looked at Kyle, the vein in his temple began to throb. He did not just look angry, he looked insulted. He slammed his gavel down so hard it sounded like a gunshot echoing through the chamber. "Order," he roared, silencing the rising murmur of the crowd. He did not look at the papers in front of him. He turned his gaze directly to the plaintiff's table, focusing his fury on Kyle, who was now sweating profusely, his confident facade melting away like wax near a flame. "Mr. Jenkins," the judge said, his voice dangerously low, "you have come into my courtroom. You have sworn an oath on the Bible, and you have attempted to weaponize the justice system to commit fraud against your own family member. You sat there and wept about elder abuse while you were actively conspiring to rob the defendant. This is not just a frivolous lawsuit. This is a criminal conspiracy made a mockery of this court." My lawyer Harrison sat back in his chair, crossing his arms, looking satisfied. The judge turned to the court clerk. "Strike the plaintiff's testimony from the record. Judgment is entered in favor of the defendant, Zoe Brooks, on all counts. The case is dismissed with prejudice, meaning you can never file this garbage in my court again." But I am not done. The judge pointed a shaking finger at Kyle and my parents. "Furthermore, I am holding the plaintiffs and their witness in direct criminal contempt of court. I am referring this entire file, including this video evidence, to the district attorney's office with a strong recommendation for immediate investigation into perjury fraud and filing a false police report." "You wanted a judgment, Mr. Jenkins. You just got one." The words hit Kyle like a physical blow. He realized in that split second that his life as a free man was over. The money was gone. The reputation was gone. And now his freedom was evaporating. Panic, the primal instinct of a trapped animal, took over. He jumped up from his chair, knocking it over with a loud clatter. He did not look at his wife. He did not look at my parents, whom he had led to slaughter. He looked at the exit sign glowing red at the back of the room. He bolted, scrambling over the low wooden partition separating the court from the gallery, desperate to reach the double doors before the reality of his crimes caught up with him. He shoved past a stunned reporter and lunged for the aisle, running blindly toward what he thought was safety, but he was not fast enough. Two large bailiffs in uniform stepped in front of the aisle, their hands resting on their belts, forming a human wall that no amount of lying could break through. The double doors of the courtroom burst open, Not by Kyle's hands, but by the force of his momentum, as he tried to flee the consequences of his own hubris. He barely made it 3 steps into the marble hallway before his escape was cut short by a wall of windbreakers emblazoned with 3 yellow letters that strike fear into the hearts of white-collar criminals everywhere. FBI. He collided with a chest like a concrete wall, and before he could even gasp for breath, he was spun around and slammed against the wall, the cold steel of handcuffs clicking around his wrists with a finality that echoed. Through the corridor, I walked out of the courtroom just in time to see the facade completely crumble. My parents and Bianca had followed Kyle out, their faces a mixture of confusion and terror, expecting perhaps a misunderstanding or a parking ticket dispute. Instead, they found their golden boy pressed against the plaster, his cheeks smashed flat, his expensive suit bunching up around his shoulders as a federal agent read him his rights. Bianca let out a shriek that sounded like glass shattering. She threw herself at the agents, her manicured nails clawing at the arm of the man holding her husband. "Get off him!" she screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. "You are making a mistake. Do you know who he is? He is an entrepreneur. He is a job creator. You have the wrong person. Look at him. He is not a criminal." She was frantic, her eyes wide and wild, desperate to assert the privilege she thought protected them. She grabbed the agent's sleeve, pulling at him. "Get your hands off him right now. He is a white man. He is a respected businessman. You cannot treat him like this. You are arresting the wrong people. My sister is the one you want. She is the one inside. She is the thief." The agent, a tall man with a face carved from granite, did not even look at her. He simply brushed her hand away with the indifference one might show a buzzing fly. "Ma'am, step back," he ordered, his voice calm and authoritative, "or you will be charged with obstruction of justice." "No," Bianca wailed, stomping her foot like a child. "He is innocent. This is a mix-up. Tell them, Kyle. Tell them who you are." Kyle could not tell them anything. He was too busy hyperventilating, his eyes darting around, searching for an exit that did not exist. The agent turned his attention to Bianca, his expression softening, not with kindness, but with pity. "We know exactly who he is, Mrs. Jenkins," the agent said. "We have been investigating Nexus Tech and your husband's other shell companies for 6 months. Thanks to a tip from Ms. Brooks regarding suspicious wire transfers." Bianca froze, looking at me with pure hatred. But the agent continued, delivering the blow that would shatter her world completely. "Your husband is not an entrepreneur, ma'am. He is the architect of a Ponzi scheme. He has defrauded over 300 investors out of nearly $12 million. He targeted the vulnerable, specifically relying on church groups and community centers to gain trust." "That is a lie," Bianca spat, trembling. "He invests in startups, he helps people, he steals from people." The agent corrected sharply. "He promised high returns on non-existent technology stocks and used new money to pay off old debts while funneling the majority into offshore accounts. And he did not just target strangers." The agent pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. It was a list of names. "Look at the victims list, ma'am." He targeted the elderly, people who trusted him with their life savings, people who invited him into their homes for dinner. The agent looked past Bianca to where my parents were standing huddled together by the courtroom doors. My mother looked confused, but my father, Marcus, was staring at Kyle with a growing, dawning horror. The agent's eyes locked onto my father's. "We have the transfer records, Mr. Robinson," the agent said quietly. "We know you liquidated your pension fund last month. We know you transferred $200,000 to Nexus Tech under the promise of a double return to pay off the house." The air left the hallway instantly. My mother let out a gasp, clutching her chest. "Marcus! No, tell me you didn't." My father did not speak. He could not speak. He looked at Kyle, who refused to meet his eyes. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. The secret meetings with Kyle. The whispered promises that they would be rich, that they would humiliate me, that they would save the house without my help. The papers he had signed without reading, trusting the man who looked the part. Everything he had worked for 40 years of labor at the factory, the sweat, the long hours, the retirement he had guarded so jealously, it was all gone. It had not been stolen by the bank. It had not been stolen by me. It had been handed over willingly to a wolf in a designer suit. My father's knees buckled. He did not fall gracefully. He crumpled like a building whose foundation had suddenly vanished. He hit the marble floor with a sickening thud, his cane clattering away from him. My mother screamed, dropping to her knees beside him, shaking his shoulders. "Marcus, Marcus, breathe." But he was not breathing right. His face was turning a terrifying shade of gray, his eyes rolling back in his head. The betrayal was too big for his heart to hold. The sirens that had been distant background noise suddenly seemed very close, as the reality of their total destitution settled over them like a shroud. The ambulance sirens were fading into the distance, carrying my father away to the cardiac unit. But my mother, Patricia, was not by his side, holding his hand. She was standing in the middle of the courthouse lobby, shaking a finger in my face, her eyes dry and burning with a misplaced and terrifying fury. "You are satisfied now, aren't you?" she hissed, her voice echoing off the high ceilings, drawing the attention of passers-by. "You finally got what you wanted. You put an innocent man in chains and destroyed your sister's happiness just to soothe your own ego. Are you happy, Zoe? Does it make you feel big to tear down people who are better than you?" I looked at her with a mixture of exhaustion and disbelief, wondering how deep the delusion ran. She had just watched the FBI drag her son-in-law away. She had just heard the agent confirm that her husband's life savings were gone, and yet she was still standing here defending the architect of our ruin. "Mom, he stole Dad's pension," I said, keeping my voice low and controlled. "He is going to prison for federal fraud. He is not better than me. He is a criminal who used you. He is a businessman," she screamed, stomping her foot like a petulant child. "He took risks. That is what successful people do. You would not understand, because you have never taken a risk in your life. You just sit in your little apartment counting pennies, while Kyle was trying to build an empire for this family. You called the police on him out of spite. You twisted the facts just like you twisted that video footage. You are evil, Zoe. You are pure evil." She was rewriting reality in real time, desperately trying to patch the holes in her worldview, because if Kyle was a monster, then she was a fool, and Patricia Robinson could never admit to being a fool. She grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "You are going to go to that police station right now and tell them it was a mistake. You are going to withdraw your report, and tell them you gave him permission to use those funds, or so help me. God, I will never speak to you again." I looked down at her hand, clutching my sleeve, the same hand that had slapped me days before, and I felt the last vestige of filial duty evaporate. I did not pull away. Instead, I reached into my pocket with my free hand and pulled out my phone. I had saved the screenshots from the digital forensic report Harrison had given me earlier, the private messages recovered from Kyle's encrypted chat logs, specifically the ones between him and a woman named Destiny, who was definitely not my sister. "Read this, Mom," I said, shoving the screen in front of her face, forcing her to look. She tried to turn away, blinking rapidly. "I do not want to see your lies," she spat. "Read it," I commanded, using a tone of voice she had never heard from me before, a tone of absolute authority. Her eyes involuntarily flicked to the screen, catching the name, Kyle, at the top. The message was dated 3 days ago, just before he came to my office with the flowers, asking for power of attorney. I watched as she read the words silently, her lips moving slightly. The message read, "I cannot wait to get out of this town, babe. My in-laws are so desperate to be relevant they practically threw the check at me. Dumb hillbillies think I am some kind of savior. Honest to God, they are the stupidest people I have ever met. Once the wire clears, I am meeting you in Mexico. Do not worry about the wife, she is too busy looking at herself in the mirror to notice I am gone. I swipe to the next image. A photo of Kyle and Destiny on a boat supposedly taken while he was at a business conference, followed by a text that said, "One more week, and I am free of these losers forever." My mother stopped breathing for a moment. Her grip on my arm loosened and then fell away completely. She stared at the phone screen as if it were a poisonous snake waiting for it to bite her. Dumb hillbillies. The words seemed to echo in the space between us, striking at the very core of her identity. This was a woman who had spent her entire life trying to project an image of class and sophistication, who had looked down on me for my simple clothes and my quiet life. And here was her golden boy, the white savior she had worshipped, calling her stupid, calling her a loser, laughing at her desperation. She stepped back, shaking her head slowly. "No," she whispered, her voice sounding thin and broken. "He did not write that. You made it up. You hacked his phone." I put the phone back in my pocket, refusing to let her hide in denial anymore. "Those are from the FBI file, Mom. They are real. He despised you. He mocked you to his mistress every time you cooked him dinner, every time you defended him, every time you insulted me to lift him up. You handed him the knife and thanked him while he stabbed you in the back." She looked around the lobby, suddenly looking very small and very old. The arrogance that usually held her upright had vanished, leaving a hollow shell. She looked toward the door where the police car had taken Kyle away. And then she looked at me, her eyes wide with a dawning horror that was painful to witness. The realization was not just financial, it was existential. She had sacrificed her relationship with her capable, honest daughter for a man who viewed her as a mark. I felt a pang of pity, but I crushed it. I could not afford pity. Not yet. I did not know, she stammered, her hand going to her mouth. "I thought he loved us." I looked at her, cold and unmoving. "You saw what you wanted to see, Mom. You wanted a fairy tale so bad, you let a wolf into the house and fed him your husband's retirement." She slumped against the wall, sliding down until she was sitting on the cold marble floor, ignoring the stares of strangers. She looked shattered, completely broken by the truth. But I was not done. "You think that is the worst part?" I asked, standing over her, my shadow casting a long silhouette over her huddled form. She looked up at me, tears finally spilling over, honest tears of shame. "I do not want to hear any more. Zoe, please." I leaned down close enough so only she could hear me. "You haven't seen the bottom yet, Mom. You think Kyle acted alone. You think Bianca was just an innocent victim in all this. You are crying for the wrong daughter. Wait until you see what she did just to keep her credit card active. You are not going to believe what comes next. So dry your tears, because the show is not over." The 24-hour grace period the judge had granted for vacating the premises expired at exactly 9 in the morning, and precisely 1 minute later, the sheriff's department trucks pulled up to the curb. The flashing lights were silent, but they screamed louder than any siren ever could, signaling to the entire neighborhood that the Robinson dynasty had officially fallen. I stood across the street, leaning against the hood of my car, watching the final act of this tragedy unfold. It was a scene I had imagined 1,000 times in my moments of darkest resentment. But seeing it in reality brought no joy, only a hollow sense of completion. My mother, Patricia, was sitting on the front steps, clutching her handbag to her chest, staring blankly at the azalea bushes she had planted 20 years ago. She looked like a statue of despair, unable to process the frantic activity around her. Bianca, however, was in full panic mode. She was running back and forth, from the house to her leased convertible, trying to salvage whatever shreds of luxury she could carry. Her mascara was running down her face in dark streaks, and she was shouting orders at the deputies as if they were her personal movers. "Be careful with that painting," she shrieked, as 2 officers carried out a large framed canvas. "That is an original. It is worth more than your car. Put it in my trunk, gently." One of the deputies, a large man with no patience for entitlement, stopped walking. He looked at the clipboard in his hand and then at the painting. "Ma'am, this item is listed on the asset seizure inventory." He turned and began walking toward the large moving truck designated for auction items, not toward Bianca's car. Bianca let out a sound of pure outrage and lunged for the painting, grabbing the corner of the frame. "That is mine," she screamed. "My husband bought that for me. You cannot take my property." I walked across the street, my heels clicking on the pavement, the sound cutting through the chaos. "Actually, Bianca," I said, my voice calm enough to freeze the air around us. "Kyle did not buy that painting. The credit card records from the FBI investigation show that he paid for it using the money he stole from Dad's pension fund. And since I hold the judgment for the debt and the lien on all household assets, that painting belongs to the estate, which means it belongs to me." Bianca spun around, her face twisted with hatred. "You witch!" she spat, grabbing a silver candelabra from the porch table. "You are taking everything. You are leaving us with nothing." She tried to shove the silver into her oversized tote bag, but a female deputy stepped forward, blocking her path. "Ma'am, put the item back, or you will be detained for theft of seized property," the deputy warned her, hand resting near her belt. Bianca dropped the silver. It clattered loudly on the concrete, drawing the attention of the growing crowd on the sidewalk. The neighbors, the people my mother had tried so hard to impress for decades, were all there. Mrs. Higgins from next door was holding her phone up openly, live streaming the eviction to the neighborhood Facebook group. I could hear the murmurs, the whispers of schadenfreude. People were pointing at the piles of boxes, pointing at the police cars, and pointing at the family that had looked down on them for years. The facade of the perfect, wealthy Robinson family was being dismantled piece by piece on the front lawn for everyone to see. My mother finally looked up, realizing they had an audience. She saw Mrs. Higgins filming and let out a sob, covering her face with her hands. "Oh God," she moaned, "don't look at us. Please don't look at us." The shame was physically painful for her, worse than the loss of the money. She tried to hide behind a pillar, shrinking away from the judgment of the community she had once ruled. Then the front door opened, and my father Marcus stepped out. He was leaning heavily on his cane, looking frail and defeated. He was carrying a small cardboard box containing his personal items, the only things the law allowed him to keep. Old photos, a few books, his medication. He looked at the moving trucks filling up with the furniture he thought he owned. He looked at Bianca, arguing with the police over a toaster. He looked at my mother weeping in the corner. And then he looked at me. He walked down the steps slowly, each movement looking painful. He stopped a few feet away from me, his eyes filled with tears that for the first time in his life were not for show. "Zoe," he whispered, his voice breaking. I looked at him, keeping my face impassive, asking him with my eyes what he could possibly have left to say. He took a step closer, his hand reaching out but stopping short of touching me. "Zoe, please," he begged, the desperation raw in his throat. "I am an old man, I have nowhere to go." "Your mother. She is not well. We cannot live in a shelter. Please, baby girl. I am your father. I made mistakes, I know I did. But don't do this. Don't throw us away like trash. Just let us stay in the guest room. We won't be a bother. I promise. Just don't kick your old dad out on the street." The porch of the house on Maple Street was where my father had taught me how to tie my shoes, and it was where he had taught me how to ride a bike without training wheels. It was also where 8 years ago he had sat on the swing with his head in his hands weeping, because the bank was coming to take it all away, standing there now looking at him broken and pleading. I felt a phantom echo of that day, the desperate humidity of the air, the smell of impending rain and the crushing weight of a parent's failure. He reached for my hand again, his fingers trembling like dry leaves. "Please, Zoe," he croaked. "The shame is killing me. I know I messed up trusting Kyle. But I am your father. blood is thicker than water. You cannot leave me on the street. I am too old to start over. I will talk to your mother. I will make her apologize. Just open the door. I stepped back out of his reach, and the hurt in his eyes was immediate, but I did not flinch. I had flinched enough for one lifetime. I looked him dead in the eye and saw the fear, but I also saw the weakness that had defined my entire adulthood. Do not talk to me about blood. Dad, I said, my voice low and vibrating with a decade of suppressed anger. In 2015, right on these steps, you knelt down. You physically knelt on this concrete and begged me to save you. You said you would do anything. You said I was the only one who could help. And I did. I emptied my savings account. I took out loans in my own name. I bought this house to put a roof over your head. He nodded eagerly, tears spilling onto his cheeks. Yes, I know. And I am grateful. No, you are not. I cut him off sharp as a whip. If you were grateful, you would not have sat at that dining table for 8 years watching your wife treat me like a servant. You would not have let Bianca mock my job and my clothes while she spent the money I saved you. You sat there eating the food I paid for in the house I owned, and you said nothing. When Mom called me useless, you looked at your plate. When Kyle laughed at me, you laughed with him because you wanted to feel big. I took a breath, the air feeling cold in my lungs. And then last week, you signed that lawsuit. I continued, pointing a finger at his chest. You signed an affidavit, swearing that I abused you. You signed a paper trying to put me in jail and strip me of my livelihood, just so you could give more money to a con artist. You are not a victim, Dad. You are not an innocent bystander. You are an accomplice. You traded my loyalty for a chance to be rich, and you lost. Marcus opened his mouth to argue, to find some excuse, but the truth was, a wall he could not climb. He slumped his shoulders, the fight draining out of him, leaving only a hollow shell of a man. I turned my back on him and walked up the 3 steps to the front door. The heavy oak door that I had refinished myself 2 summers ago stood open, revealing the hallway where my childhood memories lived. I stepped across the threshold and turned around, facing my family one last time. My mother was still huddled by the pillar. Bianca was staring at her phone in shock, and my father was standing at the bottom of the stairs, looking up at me like a sinner, looking at the gates of paradise closing. Goodbye, Dad, I said softly. I grabbed the brass handle and pulled the door shut. The sound of the heavy latch clicking into place was the loudest sound on the street. It was the sound of a book closing, the sound of an ending. But I was not done. I pulled my phone from my pocket and opened the smart home app linked to the electronic lock on the front door. My parents watched through the side window as I tapped the screen. Delete user code. Access denied. I entered a new master code, one that only I knew. The lock beeped a cheerful little electronic chime, and the deadbolt slid home with a mechanical whir, sealing the house tight. My father tried the handle instinctively, rattling it, but it was solid, immovable. He looked through the glass at me, his face distorted by the reflection, and then he slumped away, defeated. At that moment, a large box truck rumbled down the street, its air brakes hissing as it pulled up to the curb behind the police cars. It was not a moving company. It was a truck from the local charitable aid society, painted with the logo of a thrift store donation center. Bianca looked up, her eyes widening. "What is that?" she asked, her voice shrill. "Why is that truck here? Where are they taking our furniture?" I stood on the other side of the glass safe inside my house and watched as the deputies began loading the seized velvet sofas and the mahogany dining table into the back of the charity truck. "They are not taking it to storage, Bianca," I said to the empty hallway, knowing she could see the answer in the arriving workers' uniforms. Everything inside was seized to pay the debt. Since you cannot pay the judgment, I am donating the contents of the house to the poor people who actually need help, not people who pretend to be rich. 3 months after the eviction, the world had not ended. But for my sister, Bianca, It had certainly stopped spinning on the axis of her entitlement. With Kyle awaiting trial in federal prison and our parents living in a subsidized efficiency apartment on the edge of town, Bianca found herself facing a reality she had mocked her entire life. She had no degree because she had dropped out of college expecting to marry rich. She had no work experience because she believed labor was beneath her, and she had no credit score because I had obliterated it. So she found herself at the only place that was hiring for cash under the table, a bustling nail salon in the mall called Lacquer Lounge, where she was not the client, sipping sparkling water, but the junior technician scrubbing dead skin off strangers' feet. I booked an appointment there, not out of malice, but because it was the best salon in the district, and I refused to change my routine just to avoid the wreckage of my family. I walked in on a Tuesday afternoon wearing a cream-colored cashmere coat and holding a designer handbag that was worth more than Bianca's annual earnings. The receptionist recognized me immediately, rushing around the counter to take my coat. "Ms. Brooks," she chirped, "we have the VIP suite ready for you. Would you like the usual chamomile tea?" I nodded, smiling politely, and allowed myself to be led to the private area at the back. It was separated from the main floor by frosted glass, but the door was propped open slightly. As I settled into the massage chair, soaking my feet in the warm water, I heard a familiar voice complaining loudly from the station just outside the glass. "I cannot believe I have to touch this," a voice whined. It was shrill and filled with disgust. "Look at these calluses, this is disgusting, I am not doing this." I turned my head slightly, peering through the gap. The woman sitting on the technician's stool was wearing a pink uniform that was too tight across the shoulders. Her blonde hair, once perfectly blown out, was pulled back in a messy, frizzy ponytail. It was Bianca. She was holding a pumice stone like it was a radioactive isotope, staring at an elderly customer's foot, with open contempt. The manager, a stern woman named Mrs. Kim, walked over quickly, tapping Bianca on the shoulder. "Bianca, lower your voice," she scolded. "You are lucky I gave you this job. You complain every day. Do the work or leave." Bianca huffed, rolling her eyes. "You do not understand," she hissed loud enough for the whole salon to hear. "I used to be a customer here. I should not be doing this peasant work. My husband is a businessman. He is going to fix this, and when he does, I am going to sue this whole place." I watched as she aggressively scrubbed the woman's foot, taking her anger out on the innocent client. The customer flinched, pulling her foot back. "Ouch, you are hurting me!" Bianca threw the pumice stone into the water, splashing dirty water onto the floor. "Oh, stop being a baby!" she snapped. Mrs. Kim had seen enough. She marched over her face, set in stone. "Get out!" she ordered, pointing to the door. "You are done. Pack your things." Bianca stood up, her face red with humiliation and rage. "You cannot fire me," she screamed. "I quit. This place smells like chemicals and desperation anyway. I am Bianca Robinson. I deserve better than this." She turned to storm out, and that was when she looked through the open door of the VIP suite. Our eyes locked. For a second time stood still. She took in the plush chair, the fresh tea, the cashmere coat, and the serene expression on my face. The contrast between my peace and her chaos was absolute. "Zoe," she gasped, stumbling back slightly. You did this. You came here to laugh at me, didn't you? You knew I was working here." She lunged toward the glass door, her hands curled into claws. "You witch!" she shrieked, trying to enter the private suite. "You stole my life. This should be me sitting there. That is my money you are spending." Mrs. Kim and a security guard grabbed Bianca by the arms, hauling her back. "Get off me," she screamed, kicking and thrashing. "She is a thief. She is my sister, and she stole everything." I did not speak. I did not flinch. I simply reached into my purse and pulled out my wallet. I extracted a crisp $100 bill. I stood up slowly, walking over to the small table near the door where Bianca had been standing. I placed the bill on the table, smoothing it out with my thumb. I looked at Mrs. Kim and then gestured to the elderly woman Bianca had been abusing. "Please give this to that lady for her trouble," I said softly, my voice barely a whisper, "and ensure the technician is removed from the premises." I did not look at Bianca again. I sat back down in the chair and picked up a magazine, turning the page with a deliberate calmness. Behind me, I could hear the sounds of Bianca screaming as she was dragged out of the salon by security, kicking and cursing until the heavy glass doors of the mall entrance slammed shut, silencing her. The salon went quiet again, save for the gentle hum of the massage chairs. I took a sip of my tea. The silence was not empty. It was heavy with the weight of justice, served cold. 6 months later, the prestigious address of Maple Street was just a memory for Marcus and Patricia Robinson, replaced by the flickering neon sign of the Golden Stay Motel, a place situated uncomfortably close to the interstate highway, where the rumble of 18-wheelers shook the thin walls every 10 minutes. The room they now called home was a single cramped box that smelled permanently of stale cigarette smoke and mildew, despite neither of them being smokers. The beige carpet was stained with the history of 1,000 transient guests, and in the corners of the room the real tenants scuttled in the dark, small brown roaches that scattered whenever the bathroom light was turned on. The silence that had once defined their elegant dinners was gone, replaced by a constant grinding, bickering that filled the small space like a noxious gas. My father Marcus sat on the edge of the sagging mattress wearing a stained undershirt, staring at a can of store-brand soup as if it were an alien object. "This is your fault, Patricia," he grumbled, his voice rough with resentment. "You and your obsession with appearances. You pushed me to trust him. You said Kyle was a genius. You said he would make us millions. Well, look at us. We are eating cold soup in a roach motel because you wanted to show off to the church ladies." My mother, who was trying to wash a few clothes in the tiny bathroom sink, spun around, water dripping from her hands onto the linoleum. "Don't you dare put this on me, Marcus." She snapped, her voice shrill and defensive. "You are the man of the house. You signed the papers. You gave him your pension without even asking me first. You were so desperate to be a big-shot investor that you did not read the fine print. You failed this family. Not me. I failed because I listened to you," he shouted, throwing the can of soup against the wall where it dented the plaster but did not break. "You told me Zoe was useless. You told me she was jealous. You poisoned me against the only child who actually took care of us. And now look, she is probably laughing at us right now while we rot in this hellhole." The mention of my name sucked the air out of the room. My mother stopped scrubbing. She leaned against the doorframe, her wet hands trembling. She walked slowly over to the chipped dresser, where she had set up a small shrine of the few possessions she had managed to save. In the center was a silver frame, tarnished now, holding a photograph from 10 years ago. It was taken at a family barbecue before Bianca got married, before Kyle, before the lies. In the photo, I was standing behind my parents, my hand on my father's shoulder, smiling with a genuine warmth that I barely recognized anymore. Bianca was in the foreground, posing for the camera, ignoring everyone else. Patricia picked up the frame, her thumb tracing the glass over my face. For the first time, the fog of her vanity lifted just enough for the crushing weight of reality to settle in. She realized with a physical ache in her chest that she had traded a daughter who would have walked through fire for her, for a daughter who was currently ignoring her calls because she was too embarrassed to visit a motel. She realized that the class and dignity she had chased her entire life had been right there in front of her, not in designer clothes or country clubs, but in the quiet, steady loyalty I had offered for years. "I miss her," Marcus whispered, his anger fading into a pathetic whimper. "I miss my house." Patricia did not answer. She just stared at the photo, tears sliding down her cheeks, dropping onto the glass, obscuring the image of the daughter she had thrown away. She knew with a terrifying certainty that no matter how much she cried, she could never fix this. The bridge was not just burned, She had dynamited the foundation. 5 miles away in the heart of the financial district, the air was cool and smelled of expensive leather and conditioned oxygen. I sat at the head of a massive conference table made of polished obsidian, looking out over the city skyline. The view was breathtaking, a sprawling grid of lights that looked like diamonds scattered on black velvet. Opposite me sat the board of directors for the largest commercial development firm in the state. "Ms. Brooks," the chairman said, sliding a heavy document toward me. "The acquisition papers for the Skyline Tower are ready for your signature. This will make Phoenix Holdings the largest property owner in the tri-state area. Are you ready to close?" I picked up the pen, a heavy gold instrument that felt solid and real in my hand. I looked at the contract, the numbers stretching out with zeros that represented generational wealth. I thought for a fleeting second about the motel on the highway. I thought about the soup cans and the roaches and the regret festering in that small room. I looked out the window one last time, feeling the city beneath my feet, expecting to feel a pang of guilt, but finding only the calm, quiet resolve of a survivor. I signed my name, Zoe Brooks, in bold, flowing ink. "Yes," I said, closing the folder. "I have never been more ready." The wind whipped around me, standing 70 stories above the concrete jungle of Atlanta. But I did not feel the cold. I felt only the electric hum of the city beneath my feet, a city that I now owned a significant piece of. The sign above me buzzed with a low, comforting drone, illuminating the night sky with 2 massive letters, B and T, the Brooks Tower. My name written in steel and neon high enough that even the clouds had to acknowledge it. I walked to the edge of the parapet, looking down at the rivers of headlights flowing through the arteries of the city. Somewhere down there in the darkness, miles away from this altitude, my family was sleeping in a rented box, fighting over soup and blaming the world for their misfortune. A year ago, the thought of them suffering would have crippled me with guilt. I would have rushed to fix it. I would have written the check just to make the hurting stop. But up here the air was too thin for guilt. Up here I could breathe. They always told me that blood is thicker than water. It was the weapon they used to keep me in line, the chain they used to bind me to their dysfunction. They used it to justify the insults, the theft, and the betrayal. They used it to make me feel small, so they could feel big. But standing here on the roof of my own empire, I finally understood the truth that they had hidden from me. The bonds. We choose the respect we earn, and the dignity we build for ourselves are stronger than the genetic accidents of birth. I learned that respect is the only currency that matters, and if you cannot afford to pay it, you do not get a seat at my table. I had paid a high price for this view. I had lost the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. I had been dragged through the mud of a courtroom and forced to expose the ugliest parts of my life to strangers. I had to become hard. I had to become cold. But as I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the crisp night air, I realized that the price was not too high. It was a bargain. I had bought my freedom. I had bought my self-respect. And unlike the house on Maple Street, this was an asset that no one could ever foreclose on because I built it myself. Brick by brick. My phone buzzed in my hand, breaking the silence, startling me from my thoughts. I looked down at the glowing screen. It was an unknown number, a local area code, the kind of number that comes from a payphone outside a convenience store or a motel lobby. I stared at it, and I knew exactly who it was. I could feel it in my bones. I could almost hear my mother's voice on the other end, ready to launch into a new cycle of manipulation, ready to cry, ready to beg, ready to ask if I was finally happy now that I had ruined them, or perhaps to tell me that my father was sick again, using guilt as a skeleton key to pick the lock of my resolve. My thumb hovered over the answer button. For a split second, the old Zoe, the girl who just wanted to be loved, the girl who sat at the kids' table and served tea to her ungrateful sister, flinched. She wanted to answer. She wanted to explain. She wanted to hear them say they were sorry. But that girl did not live here anymore. She had been evicted for non-payment of rent. I looked at the city lights reflecting on the glass screen, and I made my choice. I did not feel anger. I did not feel sadness. I felt done. I slid my thumb across the screen, but not to answer. I tapped the small icon in the corner labeled Options, and then I pressed the red text that said Block Caller A box popped up asking me to confirm, and without a single tremor in my hand, I pressed Yes. The phone stopped buzzing. The screen went dark. The connection was severed, not just electronically, but spiritually. I slipped the phone back into the pocket of my coat and turned away from the edge, walking back toward the elevator that would take me down to my life. A life where I set the terms. A life where boundaries were respected and toxic debts were written off. I pressed the button for the lobby, and as the doors slid shut, cutting off the noise of the wind, a final thought settled in my mind, as clear and permanent as the steel foundation of this tower. The tenant who lived in fear was gone. The landlord is no longer silent. My journey taught me that shared DNA is not a license for abuse. For years I believed that enduring their disrespect was my duty, but I realized that loyalty without reciprocity is just self-sabotage. The most expensive thing I ever bought wasn't a skyscraper, it was my peace of mind. Walking away from the people who raised me was the hardest decision of my life, but it was the only way to save myself. True family builds you up. They don't demand you set yourself on fire to keep them warm. Your dignity is non-negotiable. Have you ever had to cut ties with a family member to protect your own mental health? Let me know your story in the comments below, and please hit like and subscribe if you believe that respect is earned, not inherited.